I wouldn't necessarily say, the best technical environment would be the best for your child, your son or daughter. It may be, but the context matters. And I would rather a positive influence within my son or daughter's life that help to support them more as a holistic human being than just a soccer player. I think we do categorize kids way too early. And even now being in the youth system to see how they start to tier kids at a young age, our objective as coaches at a young age is to bring absolutely everybody up. And to tier people based off of their growth when they're young or their exposure, they've had more development and opportunity than some other youngsters around them. I don't think we're doing justice to the overall situation. I have walked alongside many young girls and men that have been harmed by the sports system. I don't know necessarily you can say that you're safe sport and that you're about the health and well-being of these young people and also say, but if something goes wrong, I need you to sign this paper to waive away all your rights. That for me is incongruent. I think we as parents need to begin, this entire world beyond sport needs to begin questioning the current status quo.
As you will soon learn, Andrea Neil and her family had to question almost everything they were told about her future athletic endeavors since birth. And though she navigated the athletic system successfully, she has many questions to this day. It's very natural for her. Hi there, I'm Scott Rintoul, and this is Better Sports Parents, a podcast dedicated to exactly that, helping all of us become better sports parents through a platform of interviewing world-class performers across the sports spectrum. And by sharing their perspectives, their insights, and their opinions, hopefully you glean something that can help make you a better sports parent. We're also trying to share some of the tips, tools, and techniques that are used in doing so in a new series that is a part of this called Sideline Strategies. These are short, consumable episodes that will come to you at the end of every week and give you one thing to focus on, one thing to try in your quest to become a better sports parent. Andrea Neil has plenty of those, as you will hear in this upcoming episode. She is a living legend as far as Canadian soccer is concerned. She spent more than a decade and a half on the Canadian women's national team. She had more than 130 appearances in the red and white. She played in 4 World Cups, was the captain of the team in 2003 when Canada enjoyed its best ever finish at the event to date, which was 4th overall. She has also then taken that soccer expertise and knowledge into coaching. She's coached at the national, university, and youth levels, and she has since expanded that coaching practice to focus on leadership and mentorship for everyone, sport and outside of sport. Andrea Neil has stories, she has insight, she has perspective, and she has some questions that parents should be considering. So let's get to them. Here is Andrea Neil. Andrea, thank you very much for doing this.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks, Scott.
You, as I just mentioned, speaking of honors, are Canadian soccer royalty. So did your parents have cleats on your feet as you left the hospital as a baby?
It's actually a little bit of an interesting story. I came bottom first out of my mom's womb, so there was no soccer cleats coming out first. I was born with a dislocated leg and hip, and so right off the top, the doctors misdiagnosed it. And then when it was found out about 8 months later, that I need to go in and have surgery, and this is what had happened, the doctors told my parents that I would probably not run very well. So that's like when you look at our different approaches in life, my parents, from that point forward, took an approach that wasn't kid gloves with me. They allowed me to play. They knew that movement seemed to be part of my underlying ethos as a young human being. And so definitely no probably soccer aspirations, but they let me get into everything at a young age.
What are your earliest memories of sport or just playing as a child because movement was such a part of that foundation that you just described?
Yeah, and I really think for me, movement was my medicine, and so I was just super active and would play, and it was lots of bike riding and playing different sports. Now, growing up, when I grew up, the realities of girls' sports wasn't really a thing as much as it was just sports for whoever was involved, primarily boys. So my dad was active, my mom was a former athlete as well, and my younger brother liked to move, but for me, it was throwing the baseball. Probably one of my memories, my best sporting memories is just playing baseball, playing catch in the backyard with my dad for hours, and it didn't matter that I was his daughter, and that wasn't as common for girls to play sports. I got to model him. He had played hockey himself and had been scouted, for the baseball league, professional baseball league, and I got to watch him and he was gracious with me. And just that pure repetition of fun and enjoyment is really what I remember. But other than that, they allowed me to just roam around and move.
As a parent myself, and I'm sure you can relate to this, when you have your first child, there's so much trepidation and worry about this and that. So for your parents to hear that and have that misdiagnosis, I imagine just seeing you move and play was such a relief. Is that something you've talked to them about in terms of how they parented you as far as sports and movement in your early years?
Well, and on top of that, it was a few years later and in preschool, I was diagnosed with my left eye going blind. So that's another thing where, for years and years and years after that, I had to wear a patch over my strong eye, glasses to try and correct this issue, which was really a brain eye issue. And I talked to them. They're no longer with me and passed away at a younger age, but I know their influence. Like, for soccer, when you're patched up and you have a weak, blurry eye, and I did play when I was a youngster, if I was in goal, they'd put a helmet on me, and play on. They just found a way to allow me to continue on, but adapt for safety reasons, like I was going to dive into the post or something, which could have been a reality. But for them to approach it in more of an open way versus fear based way, we never talked about it. I can't talk to them obviously now about it, but I got a sense with how they acted, what they understood and their intent beneath.
It's really interesting because I think if someone were laid out with that scenario with their own child, perhaps the natural reaction for a lot of parents would be to pull away, to say, well, here is another reason why my child can't. And your parents did the exact opposite. How does that inform you, not only as an athlete in your life, but now how you parent your own son?
Well, and that's integral because even at 14, another doctor came and said, "Your hips can't withstand this," and told my parents she just has to stop running. And this is even before I even really invested myself in soccer. Now, there's a cause and effect also to how we sometimes move through, and hopefully we get to that point in the sport experience where sometimes it's too much given the circumstances, and we have to maintain that balance. For my son, we try to look at big picture and constantly talk about what is healthy in the moment. And sometimes the healthiest thing is to push through the discomfort and the no's and whatever it and that's the inherent lesson in the moment. And then other times where we have to respect the physical boundaries and say it's enough and we need rest. And I don't think sometimes we understand that rest is the medicine that is also needed at that point, and we barge through as if action and movement is the only thing. So it's to try and push when needed and then to stay still when needed as well.
We're going to bounce around between your youth sports journey, what you do with your son, and of course, many of the
Mhm.
issues we see in youth sports today. But it strikes me that at the age of 14, with someone telling you, well, I'm not sure she'll be able to walk or run very well, I'm not sure she'll be able to see very well, her hips can't take this at the age of 14. Given today's youth sports environment, do you think you might have been discarded is the wrong word, but sent down another path, Andrea, because we, or at least the sports system that we encounter now, tries to identify youth so early compared to the time you and I grew up.
Absolutely, and I was a multi-sport athlete, so my main sport was actually badminton, not soccer growing up, and that's where I had aspirations to go off to different world championships, etcetera, but the fact that I could unload in different seasons, and I would be playing baseball and when I was under 12, hardball with the boys, or when I was a bit older, fast pitch softball. We don't seem to have seasons anymore. It's monosport, and I think the body moves in a say in the sport of soccer in a very linear way. Of course, there is lots of cutting and different changes of direction, but it's a lot different than if I'm unloading in kind of an off season soccer season and playing baseball and learning that. I think we do categorize kids way too early, and even now being in the youth system to see how they start to tier kids at a young age, our objective as coaches at a young age is to bring absolutely everybody up. I know when I started to get identified at higher and higher levels for soccer, one of the critiques is, well, she's too slow. Having said that, there is a more holistic outlook that we can look at our athletes by than just pure speed or power, because what I could bring to a team was the leadership, cohesion, communication, um, trying to see, offer up what I could in many intangible ways. So I think we have to look at what is more of the elements that allow for us to be holistic human beings and to develop those. And to tier people based off of their growth when they're young or their exposure, they've had more development and opportunity than some other youngsters around them. I don't think we're doing justice to the overall situation.
Well, obviously, it didn't lead you away from soccer, but based on your description, soccer wasn't your chosen path at that point, even at the age of 14. You mentioned baseball and you said badminton was the sport you were really pursuing at a younger age. What was it about badminton that really turned you on to that sport and had you start going down that road?
When you look at badminton, of course, I think many people think it's this backyard game that we play over a net and we're trying to get, 100 times up, keep the bird up. It is an incredibly dynamic sport, so exciting to watch, so exciting to play. And it was my non school sport. We had been members of a tennis and badminton club, and my parents, um, one summer put me in lessons and it just stuck. So when it was the constant, even though I was playing volleyball and basketball and even soccer at a younger age and baseball, badminton was sort of that one that I was doing at the tournament level and provincial level, then junior national level. I think it's incredible, but I have to say, when I reflect back to the coaches that were most heart-centered and pivotal, that really fostered, inspiration and opportunities for development, my badminton coach, Abdul Sheikh, was one of those people. He had an expertise level that was never loud, but very quiet, um, always encouraging. He wanted me to focus more on badminton. Said I was very distracted by other sports, but at the same time, there was a gentleness that, as I reflect back, was so pivotal to me wanting to stay in the sport for as long as I did.
And just for those who may not have the frame of reference, you pursued that at a national and, as you said, global level. You are a national doubles champion in badminton as a junior badminton player, and you were playing in competitions against players from across the globe as well. Before we get on to why you chose to pursue soccer, you mentioned an important term there that many of our viewers and listeners may not know, and it's heart centered coaches. You mentioned that in your TEDx talk as well that people can find on YouTube. What does heart-centered coaching mean?
Well, I think it truly is the conduit if we want safe practices, if we want to be focused in on the athlete, if we want to focus in on the development of ourselves as leading the sport or coaching the sport. These are qualities that come from the heart. The generosity, the courage, the strength and firmness that it sometimes we need to be, the quality of clarity comes from obviously a quality of mind, but needing to understand what direction we need to go and what to say when and how best to intervene or let go or support or all of these are qualities of seeing that come from the heart as I now understand it. And so I think quite often we access sport through just the physical or even the cognitive, but yet we're talking about virtues and values and qualities that are much, much deeper than that. So as I'll explain why I ended up choosing soccer and why compasses become very integral for me, but the compass of the heart to really understand and sort of taste, for lack of a better word, what is beneficial, what is unbeneficial, what's healthy, unhealthy, what's going to be helpful, is going to be hurtful, are really a discernment that comes from our hearts.
And you had those in both sports or in multiple sports, or was it only in badminton where you felt you had that heart-centered coaching?
No, I would say or and I would say when I did get the opportunity, to soccer was recreational for me. Badminton was the high performance focus, but I got asked in grade 11 or sorry, grade 12 to participate on a grade 11 soccer team. It was a different team within Kerrisdale, but it's when an age group merged, and so they asked a few grade 12s to come and join in that environment, and that for me was I had really lovely soccer coaches and parents before that, but the overall environment within this particular group, for me, I would describe as, um, very focused on supporting the entire group, and you had a group of young ones or, grade 11s at this point, and grade 12s, that also were very focused and supportive of each other. So it was the manager, another coaches, three coaches that were also incredibly integral. And when I reflect back on these pivotal sporting moments, I it enabled me within 1 year to grow so incrementally as a soccer player that I got the opportunity to try out for a provincial team that summer after I graduated grade 12, which opened up the door to the national team environment for soccer. So it's these types of environments being led by people who were there in service to the athletes and the players that I believe is the gateway to these supportive environments that really ultimately help us grow.
I wanna highlight that point because I think many parents out there, many athletes out there look at technical development as the route to greatness. And what you're saying there is that the environment was so much more impactful in your development than the actual technical ability of the coach or a system that might have been used or skill development. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, if people were to ask me, I wouldn't necessarily say, the best technical environment would be the best for your child, your son or daughter. It may be, but the context matters, and I would rather a positive influence within my son or daughter's life that helped to support them more as a holistic human being than just a soccer player, because the way that it is approached matters. And if you could be the best technical coach, have a strong understanding of the game, and at the same time could erode qualities within my son, as in my case, that leads him down a path that actually erode him as a person and eventually as a soccer player.
So you've gone from this young soccer player who was never going to be fast enough, was never going to have enough vision, whose hips weren't going to be able to handle it, to now being asked to play on some provincial teams and try out for select squads. And at the same time, you've got this competing pull of this national level badminton prowess that you've developed over the years. And quite frankly, I feel like you were lucky to be able to last that long before you had to choose, Andrea. What ultimately was the tiebreaker? Why did you ultimately choose the path of soccer over badminton?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and the first time I sat at that crossroads because I didn't have to make a choice before because of just the seasons and everything. But as I rose up through the soccer system quite quickly, then you get exposure. I got exposure to the national team coach there. As I graduated out of under 19 badminton, the next age group up is adult. So there are these transition moments. And so I had the national badminton coach say, well, if you want to really focus in on this, you need to quit soccer, quit other sports, and focus in. And at the same time, I had the soccer coach now say, if you want to focus in on soccer, you must quit badminton. Now, fortunately, up until this point, both of these sports are quite complementary to each other. So I was able to pull footwork, my ability to pick in soccer's case, a ball out of the air and time myself. I couldn't was an explosive jumper, but I could time because of the way that I could pick up a bird out of the air visually. Uh, Different understanding of seeing different plays unfold. These were all transferable understandings and skills that I could pull over. But as you get to that level, it's just there's a threshold. And to be honest, I couldn't choose. And that was the crux of it. I actually needed to take a pause in my life. I had graduated from high school. I was now in first year university, had played university soccer, still competing, sort of nationally for badminton. And then national team engagements started happening, camps. So I did at that point a curious decision, but I had sort of longed to go away on a tall ship called the Pacific Swift. So the big sort of on the back of our dimes is the Blue Nose, and the Pacific Swift is a big wooden, tall ship schooner, square sailed schooner. And I thought, okay, I will go away and the answer will come to me. What direction I need to go. So took a pause in my university, took a pause between both sports, and I ended up they saw that I had, also on my application form that I had, cut carrots. Well, I was an assistant cook up at a camp when I was younger, and they were very much desperate at that point to have an assistant cook on board the ship and thought, "Okay, somehow I'm qualified," which really meant my preparation was slicing carrots and mixing peach drink. But somehow ended up being the co-assistant or co-cook on board the Pacific Swift as well. So never been away from home, never sailed, never really cooked, and here I go on this big voyage. And long story short, it was one of I've been through a lot of difficult things in my life over the course of where I am now in reflection, and this was a very difficult thing. I was cooking for 31 people offshore, so at times you don't see much more than a bird over the course of a week, just water. And, I learned a lot about myself and that resiliency and to grow through a skill. But I ended up, with another, um, crew member. We rented motorcycles on board, well, not on board, when we were, anchored in the Dominican Republic, and had an incredible day scooching around the Dominican Republic, but I was in a motorcycle accident, or we were in a motorcycle accident. And we were doing about 60 kilometers per hour, shorts, tank top, no helmet, Tevas, and the first thing that hit, when we went over and, we hit a trench and lost control of the bike was my knee, and it split wide open from one side to the other down to the bone. And road rash up and down the right side of my body. We're thankful, both of us, that it wasn't worse than that. My friend, had a few broken bones and some abrasions. It's I interfaced with the medical system there, and they stitch it up with dirt and gravel still on my knee. We had to pay off the doctors. The police officer, was making sexual innuendos. They were laughing when, no pain medications, but when I was calling out in pain, kids were yelling in to the room from outside because they could see out on the street. It was a really dynamic process. And eventually I had to obviously come back. The medical system there couldn't support, and in fact, it was festering. I got gangrene, so the infection causing gangrene or necrosis down there because of the way it was handled. And when eventually I was able to fly back to Vancouver, uh, I was very close to losing my leg. And so I give you that story to unfold that it's in these moments of life that all of a sudden things become clear about what you value and what really matters. And so it became clear that soccer was going to be my choice. It made my heart sing. I couldn't figure it out before, but it became very clear at that point. It also became very clear that in the dynamics, say, of university, in my first year university, especially, that there were these dynamics that the flavor didn't taste very good. Gossiping, underage drinking. Uh, there was just a dynamic that it wasn't showing that I was caring about the sport. I was caring about the team, but I was choosing this social dynamic above everything, and it wasn't healthy. And academically, I was just coasting by because I didn't care. So this motorcycle accident, this scenario allowed me to get clear that I was almost making choices, with my intelligence, that I was so underperforming in that way because I didn't care at all, and I ultimately didn't care about my teammates as much as I should have. Otherwise, we wouldn't be gossiping and different things. But so it was like this huge turning point academically, using my mind and my brain, choosing the sport, to saying, what kind of ethos do I want to be? So that began my career with the national team after that, and of course, recovering, I did recover from it, and I also got the opportunity when I returned that the coach said, "Now we need you to lead. We need a captain." And I had captained before and I had led before, but this was a very complex team, and I was learning also and understanding it's not just about how to kick a ball and learning skills there, but learning how to be as a human being, learning how to lead, learning how to use our voice, learning how to take risks. And I got to grow in that way step by step. And it was so pivotal.
Obviously, that's a traumatic event that you went through as a result of that excursion in the Dominican Republic, and no one is gonna suggest that their
Mm.
child goes through anything like that to find
No.
clarity in their future. However, I do think it's very interesting that in an age where it's go, 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 level up, take the next camp, get more instruction, that you decided At the age of 18, much further down the pathway, I need a break. And yet you were still able to find your way back. And yet so much of the messaging in today's youth sports environment is, well, if you miss this, you're going to miss out. You'll get left behind. You are a perfect example of that not happening, are you not?
Yeah, and there are many examples. And in fact, I had a coach just recently say to my son, who, he's never played year round soccer. We're just embarking on our first fall season now. He's done a few shortened spring seasons while missing a year in between each. And had a coach say, well, he missed his opportunity, that window that many talk about, of the window of coordination, and from 8 to 12. And you think, okay, that can be a reality, but there's so much more to this. And for what? So I really think that people go down a different path and sometimes miss the mark, or often miss the mark, when we think that the sport is the end point it, in itself, as if the wins and the losses and me making this team, or my young son making some sort of HPL program, that now he has arrived, or now I have arrived as a human being. And I think that's an error, that there is a deeper purpose behind our participation. And why I think there's a distinction that we really need to have as parents, as coaches, as anybody leading sport, is that difference between the objective of the sport and the purpose of the sport. So in soccer, there's an inherent objective to score one more goal than our opponent within the laws of the game, the rules of the game. And within the rules of the game, we're asked to perform the game with a certain ethic that is respect, sportsmanship, respect for the referee, respect for our opponents, respect for ourselves ultimately. And then the laws ensue or flow out from there. I think if we forget that, of course, there's the objective, I'm going to prepare players to score one more goal. And what are the skills and understanding, and even the psychology that we need to have, both as individuals and in a team, to prepare for that? But it's not the purpose. The purpose of us being a part of sport, or devoting huge swaths of our life to sport, is so that we can grow as a human being, that we can become better. I love the name of your podcast. What we're doing on the soccer field is better football actions, so that we can contribute to the objective of the game. But in order to do that fulsomely, we need to have more of a holistic approach and a deeper purpose behind doing what we're doing, or else there's the errors that we can make, win at all costs, and emptiness that will likely flow through. Even though you have a gold medal around your neck, you're going to realize that true happiness in life does not live in the gold medal.
It's a great point, and one that I would underscore as well. And Allison Forsyth, who was on this podcast, mentioned that as well, that identity crisis that so many athletes go through because of exactly what you're talking about. They've accomplished the objective, but the purpose there is lacking. I think parents go into youth sports with good intentions. I think their intentions are meant to be good the whole way through, but they lose their way because maybe they measure the wrong thing. Maybe they measure the objective as opposed to the purpose. How do we help them measure the purpose, Andrea?
Well, with the purpose, we're not going to measure it in the same way. And that's the thing, is we don't understand the types of seeds that we plant. We'll see the outcomes in perhaps in the future. So one of the things is to understand there's the process of involvement, and then there are the outcomes, and we have to understand the importance of both. But I think that, where I was saying that the objective needs to be subordinate to the purpose, and when we think that the purpose is the objective, that's where we're going to get lost. And this was sort of the essence of my TEDx that you mentioned, was sports leadership. Are we lost? To go back to the Pacific Swift, and that navigation through storms, understanding our direction and real compass points became a real symbol for me, obviously through lived experience, but also through this sport experience. The way it is currently designed systemically, I question if the majority of it is, are we lost? Because we're expecting to have healthy and beneficial outcomes when we're trying to pursue the win at all costs. And we're trying to prop our self esteem and sense of self worth up through the successes, through the wins, through the positions, through my son or daughter accomplishing this or going off to university, when in actuality, the purpose is about developing our sense of self-worth regardless of the wins and the losses, and it's through that then we can navigate at in a clearer way. So yeah, we could be purposely going off in a direction, but I query whether or not that is even the correct direction. If it's we're going to try and get the health and well-being and development that we all really aspire towards within that approach. I think the approach is a complete revolution within ourselves to see it for what it is, for what it is within our lives, and to constantly come back, bring our compass points back over and over again to our hearts. This is the purpose and the outcomes that I want for my son or daughter, for myself, are much greater than any scoreboard will ever provide us.
Well, and I know there's a lot of parents that hear that and think, well, I'm just one parent. How can I change a system? How can I cause a revolution within a system of a sport or within a sporting nation itself? And one of the objectives of this podcast is to have parents recognize that they are the greatest stakeholder as far as volume compared to anybody. There are more parents than athletes. There are more parents than coaches. There are more parents than administrators. Parents are the biggest group and quite often are left to their own devices. And they just don't know what they don't know. And if we can create better sports parents, it's my belief we'll get better sports environments, better sports experiences, and ultimately we'll get more out of sport for our children. As far as your own son, what would
Mhm.
you like him to get out of sports?
Well, that's a great question, and right now, even him showing up for the first time and wanting to participate, in the fall season for the first time, for me, that is a win. For me, it was a win when he wasn't feeling well, and not too sick to stay home, but just under the weather and went to go and support his team on the sideline. That's a win. Or, when he celebrates with his team and they score a goal and it's not in an arrogant, entitled way, but they come together collectively in joy, which is, again, a heart-centered virtue, and they're celebrating together, not in the "look at me" attitude that quite often, gets modeled. Uh, if he can learn to be a great teammate, learn to begin to see what is around him so that he can navigate for showing up for his teammates, for himself. These are all wins that he learns to practice the attributes that allow him to be a more whole or holistic person, and we can practice those if they're practiced in a more heart-bent, centered way through pursuing the wins. And very early, even before he was interested in organized sport, we would do schoolyard, backyard, after school it wasn't a program, it was the boys playing, and that's when I began to observe how the game's being played and became another sort of groundwork to how I wrote the TEDx in the way. And here's what I landed in on is trying to give him language with what he's seeing, and I'd ask him, "Are you playing football?" Like, we football is coined the beautiful game, or soccer, um, or is it Fightball? Because each of them has a different flavor. You're still trying to score one more goal than the opponent, but one version allows us to come collective, and one version allows us to respect, if it was organized, the referee in a way that is helping us to play the game and blow the whistle on us when we've crossed over the line and we're no longer playing with the proper ethic. It allows us football with the ethic beneath it allows us to look at our teammates in a way that is positive, that is supportive, that I want to work hard for my teammate, and this goes beyond the 4 lines of the field, but my teammate in life, I wanna work hard, I wanna develop myself so I can contribute, I can support you more, is a beautiful ethic that we can all learn from beyond sport. I'm gonna see my opponents in a different way. They're not going to be my enemy. We don't need to see people as enemies in this world. We know just by opening up our phones what we see going on elsewhere throughout the world or within our communities where we have the ethos of enemy. This is Fightball. Football, on the other hand, is I see my opponent as helping to show me where I am at this moment, that I'm able to develop myself, and see where I am. They're a litmus test, and they're offering up their best to allow me to do that. So part of that is like, I don't use the word as I used to as an athlete and early coaching career, the word aggressive. I say it's intense and you can be strength and you're strong and you can go in hard, but from a place of intensity, from a place of football, or you can go in hard from a place of aggression with the intent to hurt another human being. This is fight ball. And so to learn about ourselves, for him to learn about himself, that the difference in that tackle versus a tackle that is clean and with the utmost effort, but doesn't leave people hurt. Now, people do get hurt, but never with the intent to hurt another human being. So if I think these are qualities that we get to practice through the act of kicking a ball, through the act of even as a parent learning about this gives us a framework to begin to have a language and a structure to look at the sport experience from a more purposeful, higher elevated way than just the pure objective of winning.
So, as I mentioned in teeing up this conversation, you've coached at the national level, university level. Do you coach youth sports currently? And have you chosen to coach any of your son's teams?
Yes, I do coach. So part of I had a business and a company with Nick Dasovich, who used to be a former men's national team player, Whitecap coach, Whitecap player, professional player from Scotland, and we coach youth. And in actuality, we don't work together. But I learned so much with and from him, and learning myself on how to teach technique, how to teach understanding at a deeper level, because you get taught almost very superficially how to go about doing that. So we would coach together with one player just to learn what are the movements, what allows us to explode faster, what allows us to have technique, that one technique allows us to combine with another technique, have that be based in understanding. And for me, I went into coaching coaches from there, because every player gets impacted by the level of the coach and sort of the ceiling that that coach has. And then for me, the leadership. So I've kept in youth sport in that way, and then with my son, been more of the schoolyard. Where I get challenged is now interfacing, as I say that I'm going to coach in boys soccer, my son, and then coming to coach, and I'm assisting young boys as the team rotates around, and I don't actually get to coach the team. So even though I'm a coach, or now doing a spring season as U11 and now into U12, they do a system where you rotate around. And so even then I chomp at the bit, because of course I want to help them, the boys, come together with these understanding of where we need to go as a team and how we can do that, but it means that we need to practice. And so I find that the present model, at least with where we're working, I get challenged, which then I get to work on things like humility and understanding where I can and speak, because the system itself is sort of built to do a certain thing, and that's to control. And then parent volunteers that come out and offer up their time, I think we can offer up parent volunteers that much more by helping to give them the language and the structure that they need. You don't need a deep playing experience to understand, but little by little, if the more that we understand the structure and language of the game, ground it in those deeper character based, heart based principles, everybody can learn this. And for me, it allows us to see clearly. Then we know what words to use. When we don't know what words to use, we're going to yell because we're frustrated. And I think we see a lot of that happening.
Well, and as we talked about earlier, and this is a perfect segue into this part of the conversation, people think the technical aspect needs to be at the forefront, and that's the measurable that we're going to deliver for each of the children under our stewardship. And what you've talked about is the heart centered coaching approach being far more important and building these children up as individuals and as a team collectively as people, as opposed to soccer players. Volunteers, you just talked about them. They are the lifeblood of most sports organizations in this country. They are also known as parents because that's generally what they are. Broadly speaking, from what you've seen, where are we at as a sport, as a country overall, in how we approach preparing these coaches and preparing these team managers to work with children and their families?
I think the sports system needs to grow a lot in that way. I think it's really, like I said, trying to get health and well-being in a direction that sometimes it isn't. So it's become isolated and segregated. Parents over here, we're going to coach your kids. I think we all need to push together, and we all need to come up with, again, regardless of what sport there are, but creating that clarity of, again, what is the purpose? What is the objective? I really fundamentally believe also my development as a technical coach is important. And I believe that many volunteers want to know, what are the fundamentals that allow me to change direction? What are the fundamentals that allow me to decelerate before I receive a ball so that I can control a ball? Versus yelling at somebody, control the ball better, there are elements underneath the technique that I think our entire sports system also needs to come up on. So there's the the structure and the language of the sport to get better and more improved that way, and then a deeper principled purpose beneath it. And I think if each club were to just reevaluate and question the status quo of what is going on, how how we are as leaders, I think it will open it up. Because for me, I invite the parents in. I don't segregate the parents away because I want them to understand that there are different words that we can use. So instead of, did you win the game today? Did you score? They can, after watching a session with their daughter or standing sideline for a practice, they're understanding that we're actually working on how to get wider, how to lower our body. Oh, I recognize today, Susie Cream Cheese, that you had a really low body position when you went to strike a ball, as an example. And parents can start to do that and open up the dialogue. Or how did you deal with your team going down 1-0? What did you do? How were you thinking? How were you feeling at that point? And it opens up dialogue. And I think with the parents, it's just not about the players developing ourselves, but us seeing in a different way as parents so that we can open up the perspective. Parents are a massive stakeholder. And once you begin seeing in a different way, you can begin to question the status quo. And I know you and I have talked, like, I question the waivers that we sign. It may not seem a big deal. We're going through paperwork all the time. But I question paperwork that often in the sport world that says you're waving away all rights, even if we're negligent as a sporting club. When I have walked alongside many young girls and men, adults that have been harmed by the sports system, I don't know necessarily you can say that you're safe sport and that you're about the health and well-being of these young people and also say, "But if something goes wrong, I need you to sign this paper to waive away all your rights." That for me is incongruent, and I think we as parents need to begin this entire world beyond sport needs to begin questioning the current status quo and say, do we have a voice? Yes, I signed the waiver because I want my son to participate, but I do it with a sense of that doesn't feel good and a note to say, I don't agree with this as an example. And that's the action I can take to say it doesn't have to be written this way. There has to be another way.
Well, and there needs to be an understanding. And I think that's the bigger part of it. It's one thing to say, look, we're safe sports certified. What does that mean? What does that mean to the average parent bringing their child to your organization? And can you actually describe what that means if you are a representative of that organization? If a parent comes to you and says, is your organization, is this team safe sport? Yes, it is. What does that mean? Well, our policy's on the website. You can read that. No, no. What does that mean? In plain, simple language, what are my expectations of safe sport? We need to get to that place, don't we?
Totally. And I think one of the biggest um, unsafe sport situations that's currently going on is that incongruence, that lack of alignment between what what is being said in policy, what is being said in these beautiful promotional materials, and then what are the actions that are happening. So if they're not in alignment and we're not following up with what is that, so very simply for me, a definition is like free from harm. Now, we have to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and that really involves a lot of investigation on what is safe. Comfort might feel safe, but discomfort leads us to a lot of growth often. So we have to understand that free from harm, meaning what are we doing as an organization to live the values that we're talking about in order to mitigate as much harm as possible, we need to make sure that we're upholding the ethics always of dignity, of just action, meaning what is fair for all of us. And then there are many virtues and values that go into that. And sometimes that is, I'm not going to hide behind the legal system and lawyers and third party investigations, I'm going to own something that just happened, not me, we as leaders. And that's showing courage in action. And that's showing humility. And that's showing looking at what has happened through honesty so that we can learn from it, so that we can rectify it, so that we can move forward in a much safer, healthier way to ensure it doesn't happen. But we're trying to sidestep all these things and almost isolate people out of the picture, parents, and there's a lack of accountability and true inner looking that really is happening at the top levels. And this is where parents first need to question it within themselves. And then I think there can be more of a swell of people to say, no, this is not okay.
Well, one of the things that you have talked about in your mentorship, leadership, and coaching is the term ethical leadership. What is it, and how can parents spot that in an organization that their child is a part of?
Well, it's really living the values that allow us to be good neighbors with each other. So I have to care. So, but you can't say that I care and then not follow it up with an action. To be ethical means that I'm going to live from that place of care within me. So if you, as an example, many numbers of kids come to a session and no coach greets them. And they're just in the machine and everybody's rotating around and they don't see the children. They're not understanding what their role is. It's not most times out of they're trying to be negative people. It's just they're not understanding that that moment of connection to see somebody, to understand their context is integral. And sometimes people get overwhelmed by all the numbers. Then we have to question, do we have the correct model to ensure that that ethical alignment is there? Sometimes the ethics is to say, we don't stand for unsafe behavior, then we hold consequences to whatever that is, not in, I'm going to shame you as a human being, but say it's banning a coach or banning an administrator who hasn't understood, and to stand up with action to say, you don't understand within our ecosystem, these types of behaviors are not going to be tolerated if that's a situation that's warranted. But when you pass that person on to another environment and say, well, it's not going to happen here, but I'm willing to pass it on to another person's environment, you're showing that you're really not willing to take a stand. And when we said the laws of the game in the sport of soccer, the referee is there and the laws of the game are there to allow us to uphold the ethics of the game. And it turns into fight ball when all of a sudden it becomes an act of brutality and almost the ethos of warlike behavior in a soccer game. It's not pleasant. It doesn't taste good. Uh, but the referee is there to blow the whistle on us. When we have the top sport administrators and the top leaders in sport that are not willing to take the risk to be courageous, to say, it maybe is a risk to call this out to myself. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to feel badly because somehow it happened under my watch. But you were there to uphold and protect the game. And so blow the whistle, and there's consequences to the athletes on the field within sport when they don't uphold it. Why not within our sport leaders? Is that not happening as well? That we have to question ourselves and be willing to grow the same thing that we're asking the players to be on the field, that they need to grow and have character, become more technical, have more understanding, develop your character is are the same aspects that we need our sport leaders to have. So we need to hand over in leadership positions self-interest to what is best for our communities. And you can watch as a parent, watch what is happening. Don't be so invested again in the wins and the losses, but how are the people feeling? In the TEDx, I called it domination. The attitude of domination is what we have to transform. What we think is normalized. Well, I'm motivating that athlete by shaming them and tearing a strip off of them. That's not motivating them. That's fear-based. It's the opposite of heart-based. And so you begin to see what's going on, and even within ourselves. When we can see it outside of ourselves, then we need to be questioning it within ourselves. So take your time, look around, and begin to perceive what it is and look at the impact it's having on your kids.
Well, I think most parents have felt that at some point in time because there's the way you go into parenting thinking, well, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. And then there is the reflex that is baked into you because of the way you were raised and the era you were raised in. And that's a constant push and pull. And we all make mistakes and we all try to get better. But that happens where you react in a way that you don't want to. And coaches are no different. But if there is some form of accountability, AKA parents and a parent group, it certainly helps reinforce what we're supposed to be doing. You mentioned that earlier that you invite coaches and parents to have that positive relationship when you are coaching. What should a good relationship between a coaching staff and a parental cohort at the youth level look like?
It is a relationship, and we can't deny it. I mean, the parents are paying for whatever the ethos is. I want them to be a part. I wanna know what is happening with some of my players. So, there's a lot of geopolitical issues obviously going on throughout our world, And to have that open dialogue with the parents as an example to understand the context of what their family is living through, that have family members elsewhere throughout the world, that what they're being impacted by, that for me is integral to care about them, to share with them the philosophy of the program as best you can. You know, we've found a way with our team that I'm coaching within now for my son to try and show in the moments that we have with the team, what is our philosophy? What is that with how we approach their sons? With care, do I greet them? Do I care about them? And there were 2 kids that were unbeknownst to us that were moved out of our team this year and into different environments, which could be a great thing for them. I'm not sure, but I had 2 moms come with their voices shaky, emotional, because they really wanted their sons to continue on in our environment, even though their sons had the opportunity to go, say, into different hierarchical environments. They understood the values of what we stood in a very short time. I think that this is really important because nobody cares about your kids as much as you do as parents. And then as coaches, it's such an opportunity to work with our kids, and we're going to make mistakes. And the kids need to understand that we're going to make mistakes. And sometimes we run out of energy and we have an emotional battery pack that is now this big, and the heart center values are not flowing. It's frustration and bitterness and different things that flow out to your kids, but we need to feel what that feels like. And we're so busy in our society to constantly do, and we're so cut off from the feeling. What did that feel like to lose my top on my son as a coach or as a parent? It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like he's going to benefit from that, and I can repair from that place, but if I'm constantly doing and never stopping to pause and reflect on what's important, what did this mean? What did we really get out of this? Like, question for yourselves at times what you're paying for, you know?
That's a great point. It really is. And I know you're speaking about boys soccer here as opposed to girls soccer, but because of the pioneer that you are on the women's side, you will always be deeply connected to girls soccer and young women playing the sport and women playing the sport at a professional level as well. So I do want to get to this in our conversation. Canada Soccer recently released a video and it was talking about the impact that soccer and other sports can have on young girls and children in general. But it also, during the course of that video, pointed out that girls are so much more likely as teenagers to leave soccer and other sports. I know this is a big question, but I know it's one that you care deeply about because I've seen you write about the growth of the women's game and where it's at and where it can still get to. Not because we're trying to churn out only professional soccer players, but we're trying to churn out women who are empowered in so many different elements of their life. In your opinion, what can we and other parents do to keep more girls playing soccer and playing sports longer?
That is a great question, and one that, of course, has been asked over many, many years. So there's no simple answer, but one of the biggest things that I think does impact is sport has become commercialized, very hierarchical, uh, many times over, domination centered in what the outcomes are being pursued. I think many girls, where a lot of it is based off of relationships and wanting to pursue, finally, when they get a little bit of autonomy as somebody a little bit older, a little bit more agency for their choice, perhaps say, "That's enough. I'm not interested in this. It's not for me." Now, if we were to revisit, and it doesn't mean a complete upheaval of the sport, it's just what is our relationship with sport? What is our approach towards it? And can we live sport from that place? And I think it can be an incredible um, aspect and thing that we can spend a lot of our time within our life learning from and with, that can be wonderful for both boys and girls, because I think boys often stay in sport, but it's eroding certain qualities. So again, how sport is being approached, you could stay in for 20 years and be a not very flavorful person, let's put it that way, in as the outcome for it. Entitled, arrogant, dishonest, frustrated, angry, bitter, um, a sense of hubris. These are all qualities that can and to dominate over others, that somehow I'm better than you. These are all elements we can practice through the game. So perhaps there's something about the hierarchy in the present place that, yes, more boys stay in, but I'm not saying that that's necessarily a great thing and approach for our boys as well. There's nothing wrong with winning. Trust me, they don't take the win out of the objective of the game. That's the objective of it, but how we win matters. And then after we stop kicking a ball or playing on the badminton court or swimming or whatever that is for competition, what are the human elements we've practiced through our lives? And perhaps for many girls, they're taking the flavor of that and saying, I don't want that. That doesn't feed me as a human being. I want to feel that sense of connection. I want to work hard for my team. I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to go off to this team and maybe I feel like I'm not as worthy because I haven't made this team and my friend made that team. Maybe we need to again look more holistically for sport and then ask the same question after a decade to see how many girls we can keep in, if we're looking at something broader than just the wins and the losses, because there's so much more about what success looks like. Well, we need to define that. It is not wins and losses in teams and what we look at. That's what society wants us to understand or think. But then we get a certain weight and we get there and it doesn't make us happy for very long. So we have to do something else. And we're constantly going to be chasing over and over again to try and get happiness and peace outside of ourselves through sport. And what I propose is that we go inside ourselves and then participate through sport through an approach that is much broader than that. Yeah. And then ask ourselves, do we keep more people in, but are they also healthier? Because people will stay in and we can question whether or not they're healthy. If the people that quit aren't the healthier ones for that decision, depending on the circumstance.
Well, and if we even just look at metrics, I think there's an incongruence in the way we measure some of these things. Like, we're all going to cheer for the Canadian men's side at next year's World Cup that's being hosted by Canada. We're always going to cheer for our women's national team when they're in the Olympics or the World Cup. But we seem to think that if those results are good, then everything we're doing must be fine, as opposed to saying, okay, well, 20 years from now, how many of those boys and girls have developed into men and women who continue to be active, continue to be in sport? Jumpstart State of Play is pretty clear on this. When you ask kids why they play, the number one reason continues to come back as it's fun. And when you ask kids why they left, it's not fun anymore. And somehow we have dissociated ourselves from that very basic reality because certain national programs are doing well. So everything underneath it must be good because our high performance stream has churned out this result. And it's not what we really as a nation need to be looking at.
No. And and if you ask those national team athletes, that enjoyment lights them up. So that's a big chunk of their motivation. If you lose that, um, and they still approach the wins, it's not necessarily sustainable even for them. So once again, that enjoyment, the deeper purposes behind it are so integral for that person at the highest level, but it's integral for our young ones. And again, if at the end of the day we're churning out people that through their sport experience are more entitled, like I say, have more hubris, and don't want to work in their communities, then I think it's really doing a disservice and eroding. It's such a powerful opportunity sport to, if we relate to it in the best way we possibly can, to help grow the qualities that I really fundamentally understand can help to shift many of the dynamics that we see within our communities within, and that's what we can impact is ourselves to impact our communities around ourselves. But first we have to ask what we're practicing.
I share that belief with you, Andrea. And
Mhm.
as someone who has been through so many hard things, many of which you touched on in the course of this conversation, many of which you've seen throughout the course of your career, and yet instead of saying, that's not for me, I'm bitter, I don't want anything to do with it, you've leaned in the other way. I, for one, am grateful. I know that there are so many other families and children out there that are grateful for your work. Thank you very much for the work you do and for spending time with me on Better Sports Parents.
Well, thank you, Scott. Honestly, to have the opportunity, and I feel that I am connecting with parents through you because that's how we're going to make a difference. We're not isolated to push for the right things, but first we have to question within ourselves our own status quo.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Sports Parents and you found something in this episode that you can apply in your own journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way that you can support this podcast is by subscribing or following on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast is for you to share it with your network and those you see in your youth sports experience on the sidelines, in the stands, or maybe even at practice. Until then, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun. That's what it's supposed to be about.